Good morning. Thank you for joining me today, wherever you are, however you may be doing today. Thank you for joining me. Chapter 5, Colonial Society on the Eve of Revolution. We'll start off here real quick with the first question. It's probably going to be number 12. It would be question number 1 on Chapter 5, but it'll probably be listed as number 12 in this set of questions. Colonial America was what kind of pot? It is a melting pot. Colonial America was a melting pot. The population boom, there was a population boom in the New World. In the New England colonies, there had been just a few colonists there in 1700. Okay, in fact, there's 20 English subjects in England for every American colonist. But in 1775, it was only a 3-to-1. And you can imagine it's like a 20-to-1 ratio falling to a 3-to-1 ratio. That's a massive transformation. That's just a tremendous. Now, as you can imagine, the population of England didn't necessarily understand that or see that, but America is growing. It's a growing country, and that's a lot about what we're talking about in this chapter. Question number 13. List the ethnic composition of the American people in 1790. As I mentioned, America was a melting pot. There's a little map in our book on page 85 that shows just some of the areas where people settled. And it's very interesting. You're going to have a good bit of reading to do about this idea and this topic, and this just shows that in a sense where on the map. So you can place them where on the map they settled. But the ethnic composition of America in 1790 is listed on page 86. It says there's 49% English, you can write that down. 19% African, write that down. 7% Scottish, write that down. 7% German, and continue on writing these all down. Scotch-Irish is 5%. Irish was 3%. Dutch was 3%, and other Europeans is 9%. It's important to note here that all of these countries, okay, we have Scotland, we have Germany, we have Ireland, we have Irish, Scotch-Irish, we have Dutch, we have other Europeans, and English. This is a broad, multicultural society in a European sense, with 20%, 19 to 20% African. Okay, that is just very interesting. Our textbook says the population of the 13 colonies, though mainly Anglo-Saxon, was perhaps the most mixed to be found anywhere in the world. Now, you'll hear people talk, and yes, it was only mainly Anglo-Saxon Europeans that came, but you won't find, at that time in history, you didn't find countries that were multicultural in that sense from anywhere. You didn't find a country that was made up of 20% Indians and 20% Africans and 20% Asians and East Asians and 20% European and 20% South American. That did not exist. Places like the city of Los Angeles today, the most diverse city in the world, to my understanding, did not exist. When we talk about ethnically diverse, people didn't travel from Finland and travel 10,000 miles to Germany. I don't know if it's exactly 10,000. It's a long way from northern Finland to Germany, or actually maybe from northern Finland to southern Italy. No, that was an immense travel, and so you will find that this was extremely different ethnic. Diverse group of people. So, by the way, that is the question to number 14. The population of the 13 colonies was, though mainly Anglo-Saxon, was perhaps the most mixed to be found anywhere in the world. Continuing on to question number that was number 14. Number 15. Contrast with contemporary Europe in the 18th century. America was what? Okay, on page 87 it says, in contrast with contemporary Europe, 18th century America was a shining land of equality and opportunity, with the notable exception of slavery. Okay, Europe. Most people in Europe did not own any property. They had no personal rights. They had no hope of rising through society. You were born into your rank. You could not work really hard and rise through the ranks. It was almost an absolute impossibility. In America, you could You could get yourself a piece of land. Most people owned their private owned piece of land. You could work hard, your industry hard work. You could rise economically, and there was no lord and lady. Your birth was not your right. You didn't. There wasn't birthright aristocracy in the same sense there was in Europe. This is amazing. America was a shining land of equality and opportunity compared to Europe. Now, I'm mentioning this because often we look back, we compare America and in the early 1700s and 1800s today and say, why? There was they were so mistreated people, and it wasn't as equal as we hoped, and there wasn't as much opportunity as you say. Okay, compared to today, maybe that's a whole other conversation. But compared to the rest of the world at the time, it was the most equal, the most opportune society in world history to that point. Let me say that again. America was the most equal and opportunistic society in the entire world up until that point. At no place in world history did people have as much opportunity and equality as in early America at that point. Now, future societies may surpass that. But at that point, greatest ever in equality and opportunity. Most honored among the professions was and this is question number, question number 17. What was the most honored profession? The most honored profession was the Christian ministry, clergy, preachers. Most honored professions. Physicians were poorly trained, not highly esteemed. Lawyers were often viewed poorly in comparison, but preachers and theologians were viewed extremely highly. What was the main industry? Agriculture. 90% of the people worked in agriculture. What does that mean? Farming. Most people worked in farming. Most people had their farms they worked on. That's their simple farms. There was larger farms and stuff where people worked for others, but agriculture was the main industry of the people. Commerce and trade. We're going to talk a little bit about trade and commerce here, and I'm gonna draw here on the board a little triangle, and I hope you can see this. But if not, I'll try to speak up a little bit. Okay, let's imagine for a second. Here's the U.S. Colonies. Okay, here's Great Britain. Okay. Okay, here's Europe, and I know this is not a good representation. And I'm looking at the camera here. I don't think you can actually see. So I'm not going to spend much time drawing. And then down here is the Indies and Africa, okay? What you had is basically a triangle trade, okay? Trade became a very important part of the early America. In early America, there was rum was produced, there was beaver hats, there was a lot of lumber, there was smoked cod. Okay, raw goods were produced. They were shipped then often to England but very rapidly England no longer needed as much as the Americas were producing. Prices go down. So obviously, if you're a merchant in New England and in Spain, they'll pay you $30 for a board, and they'll pay you $12 in America for board, and you have 100 boards on your ship. Where do you go? Well, you travel to Spain and sell it for $30 a board. The only problem is England enforced what they call the Navigation Acts, where you weren't allowed to do that. You had to go to a British port. They would then transport it. And sell it to Spain. But they would take 10% of your profits. This is what was America's first experience with this, and this is a lot of what drove the American Revolution. Eventually, is the sugar tax and the tea tax and all this. Is America wanted to trade a free mercantilism, a free trade. They wanted to trade with whoever would buy the best. They did not only want to trade with the British or allow the British to just take a good percentage of the profit right off the top. That was a lot. This triangle trade. They started here in America, went up to Britain, and then often the British would then ship down by slaves, etc., and spices from Africa, which were then shipped to the U.S. And yet, a lot of ships did a triangle route. They could manage to do a triangle in a year. All right. A skipper, for example, would leave a New England port with a cargo of rum. Okay. He would sail to the Gold Coast of Africa. He would trade the liquor for the slaves. Then he would go to the West Indies with the slaves, sell the slaves there, and he would buy molasses in the West Indies and travel to New England, where they would then turn it into rum. Okay, it was a triangular trade. On page 93, it shows it on your textbooks very well. Things going to North Africa, coming from North Africa, going to North America, going to England, coming from England. This triangular trade. All right. When Britain tried to slow it down, inhibit it, and tax it, it increased frustration, and eventually it's going to result in a lot of the war, in the Revolutionary War. Key denominations, and by the way, that you can put that in your own words, but you need to note in question number 19 what I just discussed there about trade, the idea of triangular trade. And if you need to, you can always look in your textbook there and review some of it to get your exact words. I'm not going to be looking for exact wording, but I want you to understand how this trade was working there. All right. There was two main churches in North America at this time: the Anglican Church and the Congregational Church. The Anglican Church, it primarily in the southern colonies of Virginia, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Maryland, part of New York, and the Congregational Church, which was the Puritan Church in New England. Those are the two main denominations. You will note there was 5,000 Methodists in the year 1775. We will talk more about that. But the Methodists, which is our heritage as holiness people, that came directly out of, that is a tremendous story that we're going to talk more about. But there was considerably more, and you'll notice on page 1775 there was a number of other churches. But you'll notice these churches are all basically of similar beliefs. I'm going to continue on here to the Great Awakening. What sermon and who was it preached by that ignited the first Great Awakening? It's often it's viewed as the Great Awakening started in Northampton, Massachusetts, by a man named Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards preached a sermon called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." Now, the title sounds aggressive. Read the sermon for yourself. It's very aggressive. But he read it. He read it in a boring manner. But the power of God struck and launched the first Great Awakening. What had happened was, as with all churches, pretty soon you have and sorry, I just noticed in my textbook here a couple of good illustrations of what I'm gonna mention. But what you have at churches is often they become dry and boring. Okay, they start a new church. It's alive, exciting. The second generation comes along. It's far less exciting. But by the third generation, which is where we are here in the 1730s and 40s, we're 3 generations. You'll note this happens a lot. 3 generations away from the first Great Awakening. You'll note the second Great Awakening came when? 3 generations after the first, and 3 generations after the second Great Awakening came the revival of the Nazarene Church. Its massive revival. 3 generations after the Nazarene Church's inception. That's a good question. What's going to happen then? But you'll note this 3 generation thing happening over and over and over. All right. 3 generations. Grandparents, really aggressive, really vibrant in serving the Lord. Children, more mediocre. And third generation, church is just a formality to them. And that's what happened here in the Puritans. As we mentioned, the first group, very holy. The second group, didn't worry about as much. Third group, not as much. Liberal ideas. Liberal in the sense of they were different. They wondered that they had gone soft and they were no longer kindled by the hellfire. They were no longer worried about the hellfire. A few churches accepted the idea that spiritual conversion was not necessary for church membership. Our textbook says, together these twin trends toward clerical, which is the clergy or the preachers, intellectualism, and lay liberalism. So you had preachers caring more about intellectualism and the lay people, the church membership, not caring about having a fervent desire, led to this sapping or taking away from the spiritual vitality and the spiritual fervency. The First Great Awakening came. There's three main people here that you know the Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and also then John Wesley is often tied in with the First Great Awakening. And all three of these preach hard, rough sermons condemning the lives of their people. They emphasize holy living. Okay, that was their emphasis. Now they had different theological beliefs. All right, in some aspects. They were not unified theologically. But what they were unified on was a belief in holy living. All right. And I'm reading here. During some of these revival meetings, countless sinners professed conversion, and hundreds of the saved groaned, shrieked, or rolled in the snow from religious excitement. George Whitefield heaped abuse on sinners and shook enormous audiences with emotional appeals. What happened then is you have a group that really adopted the fervency, okay, and they became known as New Lights, and the Old Lights, which were people that did not adopt this fervency and this emotional religion, okay, and that was a separation. New Light centers of education were founded, such as Princeton, Brown, Rutgers, and Dartmouth. Harvard had been founded previously. And speaking of education, this is question number 21. Puritans were zealous about education for what reason? They were interested in education for religious reasons. They wanted people to be able to read and understand the Bible in their own language. Goes back to Martin Luther. What did Martin Luther want? He wanted people to read and understand the Bible. Why are you today in Bible college? One of the main reasons you're going to college is so you can know the Bible and know what you believe and why you believe it. That's why a Bible college, okay, exists. We're going to continue on here too. What happened in the Zenger, called the Zenger decision? I've actually never heard that word pronounced. So I hope I'm pronouncing it right. But the Zenger decision was a case where it's an interesting case, and I'm sorry, I skipped over something I was going to read, and just for humor's sake, I'm going to go to the Zenger case in a second. Benjamin Franklin wrote a lot of stuff in America. His writings became very well known. He became, after the Bible, Benjamin Franklin's writings had about as much influence as anything. But again, the Bible had the most influence. Benjamin Franklin, a couple of things he said. It was a good example is the best sermon. He also said, many have quarreled about religion that have never practiced it. I think that's a pretty good quote. In fact, I might ask for that on the test. I'm going to write that down right now. We'll put that in here as the bottom of a question. But a Benjamin Franklin quote: many have quarreled about religion, but have never practiced it. So please add that to your questions if you can in some form. Probably not going to mark you off for it, but I would ask if you could to add it. Ben Franklin quote: many argued about religion, have never practiced it. It's an interesting quote. Another quote of his was, serving God is doing good to man, but praying is thought an easier service and therefore more generally chosen. Interesting. Benjamin Franklin again says that praying is thought to be an easier service and therefore more generally chosen than serving God. How many observe Christ's birthday? How few his precepts? Oh, it is easier to keep holidays than commandments. Ben Franklin. It's easier to keep holidays than commandments. It's all easy to observe Christ's birthday, but few observe his precepts. Interesting, Ben Franklin said that. Speaking of education, one interesting thing, and again I digress here for a second, and I hope not to take up too much of your time, but I found this interesting. In your admissions, admission to a lot of these early colleges, okay, Yale, Harvard, Dartmouth, College of William and Mary, I believe, there it is basically everywhere. Princeton, there was an admission requirement, and then your end of your first year requirement. Your admission requirement is that you're fluent in Latin and Greek, Okay, your admission requirement your first year completion requirement. And this is interesting because it shows the background understanding of the individuals. And this is going to be a question. We're going to put this in here as question number 22. The Zinger question will be 23. In your end of your first year, and some of you, if you're reading textbook, you might not find this exactly. So I may not actually have it as a question. I'm sorry, but in your end of your first year in college, you had a very important assignment. That was you had to translate the entire New Testament, word for word, from Latin and Greek to Hebrew. I'm sorry, from Latin and Greek to English. Let me say it again, because I got my words confused. All of your educated people had to translate the entire New Testament from Latin and Greek, okay? The entire New Testament, translated from Latin and Greek to English. Now, I believe a lot of you are freshmen, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what your freshman assignment is going to be. Well, it's history class, so we're just going to go ahead and tell you what your freshman assignment is going to be. I mean, we want to follow after them historically, right? Okay. You get the joke. It's not funny, I know. But just imagine you today trying to translate the entire New Testament from Latin and Greek, okay, to English. Now, can you translate the entire New Testament from Latin and Greek to English and not know what the Bible says and not know the foundational precepts? No, you can't. You cannot know that. So, and herefore, it is very important. These are the people. Most of your people found at the Constitutional Convention, and most of them were college educated. And what did they know better than anything else? They knew the Bible and its values and morals. The Zinger decision. Sorry, I got distracted. John Peter Zinger was a newspaper printer. He printed about some stuff about the corrupt royal governor, some stuff that was accurate and true, but defamed him. Okay, he was defended by he was hauled into court. The governor said he said mean things about me. Hauled him into court. In court, he was defended by an individual named Andrew Hamilton. Okay, not Alexander, Andrew Hamilton. Okay, but Zinger argued that he had printed the truth. So therefore, you should not be able to lock him up. He didn't create false statements about this person. He printed accurate and truthful statements about him. The Chief Justice instructed the jury not to consider the truth or the falsity of Zinger's statements. Just the mere fact of printing them, irrespective of the truth, was enough to convict. Okay? He was charged with seditious libel. So they charged libel. You said some mean things or libelous things about this. Hamilton, the lawyer, argued that the very liberty of both exposing and opposing arbitrary power was at stake. The jury came back with a verdict of not guilty, saying he has printed, with the concept that he has printed the truth. Therefore, libel, a person can be sued for libel when it is false. To put it in modern context, if someone says fake news about you, you can sue. Okay? When we say fake news, obviously I'm not referring to the modern, I'm not referring to our political scene. I'm saying to in our current, there's been a legal statute saying there must be intent and deliberate nature, and they must be trying to hurt the person. But this was established that the truth mattered when it came to libel. You all know this is very different than in the old world, where if someone said something mean, truthful or not, they could be hauled into court and sent into prison for saying the truth about someone. Here in America, you could say the truth and not be sent to jail. This freedom of speech is under attack today. We see it in a lot of places. Okay? I'll even mention one. James Damore and Google got fired for writing an article by my understanding of scientific research, was the truth. Got fired. Okay? We have to. It's important for us to understand this principle that you could not be sent to jail, not fired, but sent to jail for printing the truth. That is a very important concept that you must remember in American politics, in American history, not in politics. Okay, we're going to continue down here. So it's going to be question number, it'll be question number 23. Who could vote and what was not beyond the reason of the most industrious and enterprising colonists? The only colonists that were allowed to vote was people who they believed were middle class or upper class. They did not want voting people who were low class. And by low class, they meant people who were not industrious and hardworking. Okay, that is not a term that of discrimination. It was actually a term where they viewed people who were moral, upright citizens, living a holy life, or had a stake in society. Family people were allowed to vote. Each family often had a right to vote. I'm going to read here out of the textbook. Fearful of democratic excesses, they were unwilling to grant the ballot to every biped of the forest. Perhaps half of the adult white males were thus disenfranchised. But because of the ease of acquiring land and thus satisfying property requirements, the right to vote was not beyond the reach of most industrious and enterprising colonists. It would be like today saying, okay, you have to have $4,000 in your bank account to vote. Now, many people may not have $4,000 in their bank account. They choose to play video games instead of picking up extra hours at their job overtime. Okay, but even the lowest paid employees today, you can work at McDonald's and accumulate $4,000 in your bank account if you work overtime instead of playing video games, and therefore you would have the right to vote in a comparison to modern context. Okay, now that is what they're saying here. They wanted people who have a proven work ethic and a proven ability to take care of their money and a proven ability to make decisions. They didn't want poor decision makers and people with no money being able to vote themselves money. It's a very important concept. They did not want people who had nothing to be able to vote themselves something. They wanted people to have to work to earn it. They didn't want the government giving handouts. Okay? You had to earn your own stuff and therefore the right to vote. The next section talks about colonial folkways, but we're not going to go much into that, except I'm going to mention that there was a lot of sports that were played in the New World, including the sport of football. And you're not going to find this in your text, so if you're following along, just pay attention here for a second. Football was developed, it may have actually originated in England, but it was played in colonial America. And in colonial America, often towns would compete each other, or a town would split itself in half, and there would be a ball, and it would start on one end of the town street, and you had to get it from that end of the street to the other end of the street. And by getting it to the other end of the street, I mean, there would be fights, you'd be ramming each other, fighting, pushing, okay? I mean, you even had some physical, like, real brawls break out. But this was played by everyone, men and women. This is where the concept of football came from. It's not hard to imagine if you have a ball and you're trying to get to the end of the street, and after a while it says, hey, we should take a break every little bit. We should take a break so that we can get a little rest in between. Therefore, the concept of downs could originate. Hey, let's take like after so many tries, how about we get the ball for a while? Okay, we can have that. And you can imagine, blocking as it may occur. Several people lining up and, making a line and blocking people. And eventually, you have the concept of football as occurred in the early 1880s and 1920s. And then obviously today we have the NFL and American football, etc. We have passing and, wide receivers and lines of scrimmage and all the rules. But it originated here in New England with a town, often a town, but sometimes towns competing against each other, trying to take a ball from one side down Main Street to the other side, and basically a brawl trying to get it accomplished. And that was one of the pastimes of the New England colonies. There were sports in the South as well, horseback riding, a number of sports. But that is the end of Chapter 5. Thank you for joining me today. Have a great day.